Welcome to Behind the Build. I'm your host, Jonathan Jacobs, and today I have with me Hugh Randolph of Hugh Jefferson Randolph Architects, based out of Austin, Texas. Hugh, welcome to the podcast.
Well, Jonathan, glad to be here, and I appreciate your hosting.
Of course, my pleasure.
Forward to it.
I was doing a lot of different research on practices abroad, and in my research, I came across your practice, and I saw there were actually two of your projects that kind of drew me in, and one of them was the addition to that heritage home with the beautiful custom levers for the windows and that whole addition in yellow. So that was one. And then the other project was the passive house that you had collaborated on. And so after looking at both those projects up on your website and Instagram, and I said, you know what, I got to reach out to him. I'm curious to hear more about his story.
Yeah, well, again, I'm glad you did, and looking forward to kind of sharing more with you.
Yeah. So I know the practice has been around for a little while now. I'm always curious to start things off with people and getting to know who they are and what their path was. So when I went online and I read your bio on your website, I see that you had a real strong infatuation with the concept of design and architecture from a young age. So what did that look like for you? How old were you when you first really took to the idea of drawing in space?
Yeah, I usually say 7 or 8, but quite honestly, it could have been 9, it could have been 6. I did not know any architects growing up. I knew that the profession existed. TV shows, movies, The Brady Bunch. The dad was an architect, but I think the combination of imagination and the practical, I think, is a good way that I like to think of it, is that I don't think I'd want to be a fine artist, just alone in my studio with a blank canvas. I like having the structure. I really love having a physical end result, that is meaningful to other people. And on occasion, I think it's nice to have a self-directed project where you can really explore things. But I really get inspired by clients and what they bring to the table, and working as a team, I think is kind of key for us. And so, even though I didn't know all those things, obviously, as a 7 or 8-year-old,
Yeah.
I think just the use of having imagination and creating a space, must have been very inspiring to me.
And so were you really young? Were you drawing like what your room would look like? Or what did that what did that look like for you?
Great question. And I would say that, liking to draw, liking to read, probably more so than I do now, in fact. But no, I think just having a very active imagination, I think, is one way of describing it. And so whether that's explored or expressed, by drawing or by other means, I think that it's sort of all, tied together. I'd like to think of, creativity. I think everyone is creative, first off. And I think that how they express it, a lot of people don't have the opportunity to, but someone who loves to cook, that's one way of creating something, expressing something, sharing it with others. I think you could be a musician. There's so many things. Some of them are more stereotypical in terms of the creativity, but I think that certain people are really more wired to wanting to kind of produce something that's physical.
Right.
And I think that that's something where I kind of follow those lines. My dad's an engineer, retired now, and my mother, much more artistic and so forth. So I like to kind of, it's perhaps simplistic, but I think it's very true, is that obviously everyone gets inspired by their parents and influenced by what they do. And so again, having that combination of the more, you say left brain, right brain, but the functional and the pragmatic, and then the more kind of whimsical and creative, how they kind of, I think architecture obviously is a good intersection of those two different ways of looking at the world and thinking about things.
Mm-hmm. What type of engineer was your father?
Trained as a mechanical engineer. He worked for Shell. And so, different refineries that were being built, it would help to kind of manage the process. And, so I've met different people. This is kind of down here in my part of the world, but, living in New Orleans and Houston and then Baton Rouge, Louisiana, is very typical, for where the different oil companies, have a lot of operations. It's kind of like up in Canada, if someone were to say, oh, I live out in Calgary, or at least where you might have a pretty good sense of what industry they're in. But anyway, that's what my dad's career was.
Okay. And so when you were in high school, were you setting up to go to school for architecture at that stage? Or were you still
You
kind
know what?
of, go ahead. Sorry.
A good question, and I think that the high school I went to it's a public high school, but sort of what they call a magnet school, kind of college prep, academic, focused,
Hmm.
and a lot of different. It wasn't geared. There's some high schools, especially in the States, where they're really geared towards, say, science, or they're geared towards performing arts or something, which is fine. I really like the fact that my high school, was kind of more broad based. And so you're not only hanging out with people who have the same interest, you're learning from different people who have different skill sets. But no, I knew that I wanted to go into architecture school at the university level as an undergraduate, which is still fairly common. I think it's evolving more so in the last, 30 years or so, towards having people get a different undergraduate degree and then a master's in architecture.
Right.
I don't regret that I went right into architecture school, and I went to Tulane University in New Orleans, which had a lot of basis in theory and my favorite class actually was architectural history,
Hmm.
and design studio is actually probably my favorite. But when it came to like the structures classes and so forth, those were I say necessary evil, but not an evil. I was not inspired by things like the physics equations and so forth. I know that it's important, and you hire people to kind of structural engineers, really, that's their focal point. But no, I think that I don't regret having gone right into architecture school as an undergrad. If I were to advise someone now, I'd say probably get a degree in something else undergrad and then go on and get the master's, postgraduate work in architecture, whether it's art history or whether it's English or whether it's environmental science. Could be, we just hired someone who started last month, had a architectural engineering undergraduate and then got his master's. But being well-rounded, I think, is very important. And it doesn't mean that you have to study those things in college, but just learning a broader base and never to get into a bubble of only thinking about the architectural culture, but being able to relate to a broader range and getting a broader range of influences, I think, is very important. Having said all that, I did jump right into architecture school, 17. I turned 18 when I started, like a few months later, but
Okay.
starting right away because I knew that that's what I wanted to do. Had a real confidence about it.
And did you complete that? And was it a 3 or 4 year program?
It's a 5 year.
Oh, it's a 5 year program.
Most undergraduate programs in the United States, in general, undergraduate college is 4 years.
Yeah.
Architecture, if you get it as a architecture degree undergrad, it is a 5 year typically. Now, sometimes they have what they call 4+2, and there's certain standards. I'm not gonna say there's no standard, but there's different ways of getting an architectural education. And but what I did was a 5 year undergraduate.
Okay.
And then later on went on to a master's program.
That's what I was going to ask. And then you studied your master's program. And were they both the same school or different schools?
Different schools. I finished my undergraduate at Tulane and then moved up to Washington, D.C.
Yep.
And I worked for a practice for 5 years and took the licensing exam and became a licensed architect right around the same time, though, that I thought I might want to teach. I decided not to, but and also just wanted to continue to learn. And so after 5 years of working, then I went on. I moved out down to here at Austin and University of Texas, to study for a master's.
Got it. Okay. And when the practice you had worked at before, it was with Charles Moore. Was that right?
No.
In
The
Washington?
practice in Washington, D.C. was a large practice, a design-focused practice, but did a range of things. Now, Charles Moore was here at Austin. He was my advisor in the graduate program, which is kind of geared towards post-professional people who had worked for a couple of years. And so I found it very well suited, to people who are more kind of in my phase professionally.
Yep.
Now in Washington, D.C., though, it started out about 65 people. And then by the time I left, it was like 110 or so.
Oh, wow.
Kind of grew a bit, but it's a large practice, I guess, relatively speaking, and which essentially evolved over the years, but did different work, did some museum work, some embassy work, some private schools, and also some commercial office buildings. So kind of a range, but I think a great group of people, good place to start. And I kind of joke it. in some ways, though, it had nothing to do with what my practice is now, but I enjoyed it and learned kind of that side of what architecture is, larger buildings with large teams of people working on the projects.
Right. But and I assume that being exposed to that at that stage also helped define what you wanted to do for your own practice at some stage.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing. I think that although I enjoyed working there, in hindsight, I really know that I like being my own boss, much more so than working with a large, more corporate kind of a practice. Nothing wrong with that for people who prefer that sort of setting. But no, I like having the more direct connection to clients that I have now, and I like having a smaller team. We kind of range. I think there's 7 of us now, but it ranges. We range in size anywhere from 4 or 5 up to I think about 8 or 9 at the most. And I like having that size of a team as opposed to 107 or so. And the way I look at it is that I think that if you're a smaller practice, on one hand you have to do a lot of variety, but at the same time, I really feel very fortunate that in my kind of setup, I get to really do what I like to do, what I think I'm good at, really design focused. And then having a great team of people who, help assist with that, is very, very critical. I couldn't just like I wouldn't want to be a sole practitioner as an artist, fine artist with a canvas, paint. I don't think that there are some practices where it's really just a sole practitioner. They take on fewer projects and they do all the drawing and all the coordination and everything else, all the details. I think it's good to have a balance of different skill sets. And I like also we're all in person. We are not a remote practice. And that's something that I really prefer, even, if I'm not there, every minute of every day. Having that team of people in one room, really gives me a lot of energy,
right,
and so forth. But again, I like having a smaller practice. And going back to my initial experience starting out, I think that having it's more in hindsight. It wasn't as if I really didn't like it and wanted to, be a sole practitioner or a small practice. Again, it was a good experience to have. Did no houses, which is obviously what we focus on now is most is residential, mostly single family, but almost all residential is our practice. And the practice I'd worked for in the past, very little of that, and so forth. So that's a big difference.
Yeah, I mean that's what I've come to find. With a lot of the practices I've spoken to that have a focus on residential. There are some that have the ability and the desire to work in multi-res and commercial and institutional projects and public works, but everyone tends to lean more towards, when they're working in both those environments, they generally like to lean more towards the residential, just because of the keen interest in being able to solve a problem for a family.
Yeah, and I think also this isn't true of every non-residential project, but I find that most people across the world, and even the United States or Canada, the vast majority of people do not live in a house that an architect designed. And even out of the homes that architects have designed, a lot of people just buy them from a previously designed home. But the people that come to an architect, the families that take the time and the expense, and there's both, because it takes about 2 or 3 years by the time you hire an architect, go through the design process, all the building permit, and then the construction. It's at least a 2-year process, usually 3 years, and that's a big commitment. And so what it means for me and for most of our clients is that this is very important to them. They value it. It's one of their big dreams in life, and with that comes a lot of responsibility that we feel, but also we get inspired. It's a very important thing. So we're a real team, and I think there's a real passion on most clients' parts to it, and I think that compared to if you're an investment group and you're building a big office building, part of your portfolio of real estate investments, you care about it, but it's a very different kind of caring, I think that if it's a church or a school, there's certain building types that I think people are more emotionally invested in, and it means more to them at a very personal, deep kind of gut instinct level. But I do feel that a house where a family lives and whether empty nesters or whether you're raising a family, there's a big part of you that goes into it. And we really try to listen to learn how to make something, if you're going to go through all that hassle, I guess put it this way, if you're going to go through all that time and expense and emotional, sometimes a roller coaster,
Yep.
hopefully a good one. But no, I think that we want to make sure that what we help the client create is something that is really reflecting who they are, what their values are, and also the location, the site. But again, if we were to do something kind of cookie cutter, then it's like, well, they could really just go buy something. Like why go through all that time, that investment, and just have something that is relatively ordinary
Yes.
and nondescript, doesn't really reflect who they are or where that house is located. And so those things really inspire us. Sometimes they're challenges, but we like a challenge.
Yeah. And so you started your practice in what year?
Started it in the early 90s. I would say it was, well, I was still in grad school. So like 93, 94, I guess, if I were to really put it there. So, which as I tell you this stuff, Jonathan, that's like, wow, that's, that's 30 years.
Yeah.
Um,
Look, the
yeah.
Walden
So
Walden
yeah,
Homes, we've
91,
been there since
94.
1990. So,
Yeah.
I, I joke with that about that with Bruce all the time and Danny. Company's
Uh-huh.
34 years old. It's not young.
Yeah. No, I think that it's something that, we just having, what kind of makes me pause is like, wow, that sounds like very established kind of practice, because in my mind, we are still growing and learning and wanting one day to kind of achieve certain levels of designs, and always wanting something new and different, and so forth, which is good, and I never, it, maybe at some point, I hope I never get complacent or just kind of start repeating things. You want to learn from what you do and kind of not reinvent the wheel each time.
Hmm.
But at the same time, I think that we're always exploring and always kind of wanting to grow, and with that, it makes me feel like we're just getting started. But yeah, how it's been since the early 90s.
And it's been, as you say, it's been solely residential work.
With one or two exceptions. We've done, one or two small things that were like for past clients or something, but no, it has been residential and some multifamily, but again, primarily, single family. And
Yeah.
what we like is that within that, though, especially, and it could be true perhaps in other parts of the world, but here in Austin, a lot of our work has been in central Austin.
Yeah.
And as many of you all might know, Austin has changed dramatically, in the last, 30 years. A lot of growth. There's, Dell Computer started here. There's a grocery chain, American chain called Whole Foods.
Yep.
Elon Musk now lives about a mile and a half away from me, and, Oracle has their headquarters here, and it's, on and on I go on. And
It's a
so for the
massive
most
tech
part,
hub.
I like, yeah, massive tech hub and a lot of creativity in terms of music, and the food scene is really great.
Yep.
And the university. So there's a real nice mix of things, but it's very eclectic.
Hmm.
And so with that, you get a lot of different types of people. There's no one kind of, I don't think there is one homogeneous Austin style. There's not a lot of historical buildings. We've done a fair amount of work in older, but here in town, an older neighborhood is like 1920s.
Right.
If you go to New Orleans, or you go to Montreal, or you go to Paris, I mean, an old 1920s is not old. It's, like 1420, or
Yeah.
wherever is old. But also there's a geographical variety here. You go on one side of town and it's flat, different kind of soil, and then you go another couple of miles and you can have like cactus and what other people think of looks like Texas, more rocks and, different kind of landscape. And we've done some ranches a few hours outside of town where it's a very dramatically different physical environment, natural environment. And so when I look at it is, yes, we're doing residential, but since we're working with different types of people, from different backgrounds, and we're working in different locations, there's always something to keep it fresh and helps us avoid become formulaic or getting, as far as it goes for myself, I would get bored if we only did projects in one neighborhood for, certain types of families, and certain styles of, aesthetics.
Right.
And it's not all about what we would care about. Like, okay, well, if Hugh gets bored, if his team gets bored, well, that's like suck it up,
Yeah.
That's not what should motivate us. But I do really enjoy having different locations, different types of people, and all the common thread of being residential.
Right.
But again, having that all these other forces really help to kind of keep them fresh and different, or hopefully they do.
Okay. And so what was it like? Like you talk about, early to mid 90s, you start this practice. Here you are now, taking on projects in different areas and different typologies. What was it like early on? What types of projects were you requiring, especially given the fact that like you did not grow up in Austin, right? So it's not like
No, I
you didn't have the background to know everybody.
well, the way I think of it, and I think this is part of the truth, is that when I was in grad school, there was a few people who would come to the university to try to find like an architecture student
Hmm.
to work on small projects, which is another way of saying they wanted to find cheap labor. Even at that time, I kind of knew that, but I was pretty excited. Like, wow, they're paying me to be their architect, and it's as far as a student job, it was certainly profitable. And a lot of times we were trying to provide more than they were really asking for in terms of the level of design and the uniqueness. They wanted something pretty basic and very simple. But again, it's good training for me. It's good experience. And then, little by little, one thing led to the other. And over time, projects, and at that point, I guess, like so I did that for a couple of years. It's pretty basic things,
Hmm.
and didn't really. It was only myself, so I didn't have to have the revenue coming in, the business end of it all.
Right.
I did not have to have the revenue coming in to hire people or to pay rent. I was living in a rental duplex, 2 bedroom, and 1 bedroom was where I had my drafting table set up and all that. So again, it was really very, it was like zero overhead. I had
Yeah.
no employees. I had, just very, very little in terms of any kind of expense. And so again, that I could not do that now. Somebody has a family and so forth. It's, so you just actually stumbled in on it. That's not really the way of looking at it. But when something would come to us, we try to make the most of it. And if you continue to do that, no matter where the project is, we had a few spec projects early on where they hired an architect. They had it's an investment project. And
Yep.
so they had a certain budget from an architect. And so we made it into something above and beyond what their expectations were. And then other people would see that.
Right.
Other folks would see that we had done and hire us for their own house. And so again, my philosophy has always been whatever comes your way, make the most of it, and that will lead to other things.
Hmm.
And it also, you need to have an environmental, or excuse me, you need to have an economical, situation. The economy in your place has to be allowing for that.
Yeah.
If you're in a town that is, less work, less growth, less people moving there, fewer people moving there, you can't just say, well, I'm going to do a really good job and other folks will see it and then they're going to hire us and then other people will see those projects. You need to have all of that. But you could have a great economy. You could be living in a boom town. And if you're only doing what is asked of you and not trying to kind of like achieve anything greater,
Hmm.
odds are you're going to kind of level off, maybe sort of stagnate, right? And when we looked at it, we were just very enthused, to kind of make the most of every project.
Right.
And and again, we're lucky to be in a place where there was a lot of growth. There's a lot of creative, interesting people moving here,
Hmm.
and you get established, and then over time you realize, oh, wow, how did this happen? We're established, and we're kind of getting considered for a wide range of projects
So
because
do you remember that first major new build that you got and what it was to the practice? Were you alone at that point on your as a sole practitioner, or did you have other people working with you on the first new
I
build?
was alone as a sole practitioner, and then first there's a few new builds that I did on my own.
Okay.
and they turned out well. One or two were on different home tours and so forth. Here in Austin, the local AIA has a really strong homes tour every fall. They've had it for like 35 years now,
Yep.
since before I moved here, and it's become a really big. People travel from other cities now, for this tour. In fact, and so that's been a good thing for us. But some of the early projects were a sole practitioner, and then I guess around '99 or so when Austin really started to take off, Dell Computer was, on fire, big
Yeah.
in terms of like really, happening, and another, the whole .com thing was huge, and then there's a little bit of a dip, but we've never had any real economical, crash here and so forth. But around '99 or so, I hired one or two people, and I can say this now. I was pretty clueless how to manage a team, Still learning, still
From
learning.
what I
I'd like to
understand,
say,
you are
but
not alone in that.
yeah, but no, but really, that was around the time frame where I had maybe two or three relatively large design focused new commissions that people really wanted, something that was not just a basic builder spec house kind of a project.
Hmm.
And so then I hired some people.
And the types of projects that you look at in terms of architectural style, are you looking do you have a preference? Because I know, and looking through your profile, I see that there's some contemporary and modern additions to heritage. I see that some of the other designs are on the more contemporary side. So is that more of what you lean towards?
I would say one time someone described it, maybe I did, and it sounds kind of hokey, but purposely eclectic is something I've used that phrase before. And I think that in a way, a lot of folks do come to us because we don't have a signature style. That's still really, even though no architect likes to say that they do. There are certain projects I can drive around town, or I can look in a magazine and say, "Oh, I bet you so and so did that project," because they have a relatively consistent vocabulary,
Yes.
otherwise known as style.
Yep.
But no architects no one likes to be told like, "I don't have a style," but and nothing wrong with that. But I think that again, we don't have a predisposed formula or predisposed aesthetic that we lean towards one way or the other.
Mhm.
We might have more of one than we realize, but we've done some things that are very contemporary, very modern, minimal aesthetic. And then we've done other things that are much more about texture and traditional, in terms of that's the one would kind of categorize them. I think that one of the things that I like is that sometimes people say, "Well, what style is that?" And I was like, part of me could be a smart aleck and say, "Well, you tell me," or something, but again, not having something be so easily labeled.
Yes.
To me, if it's easily labeled, that means it's something like it existed before. And if something like it existed before, then how could it have been really inspired that much by that site and by those people who live there?
Yeah.
We've also had a number of clients where when a family is looking for an architect, the spouses with the husband and wife, will, "Oh, I like this house." And someone else will say, "Well, I like that one." And then they realize that we kind of find that happy medium between what different people might like. We've had a number of projects where the husband, it seems, is more often the one who likes modern architecture, and the wife likes things that are a little more domestic or a little more traditional in some manner.
Mhm.
And so we've had a number of people who kind of both of them kind of relate to things that we've done.
Right.
And so that's when you get a little bit of a mix of character. And we don't really feel that when it comes to an aesthetic that one size fits all, but we also don't feel that any house has to be pure and consistent throughout. There's some spaces where you like to have a big open space, big light, bright area, but then you might want something that's real cozy, and small and intimate in other areas that are more about texture and, kind of character, mood. Right. And so having we've done a few houses where they're brand new homes, but they look like they might have been evolved over time. Just as if you have an old building that is then contrasting with a modern addition.
Right.
We've done a few new houses where it's almost as if you're creating this false history, but I don't think there's any rules to say they can't do that. And not to be too literal about it, to make it look exactly like its old building with a modern addition, but But again, having that kind of variety of spaces in one project, I think is a really nice thing and
Hmm.
can be really appropriate.
And you're saying that your projects are ranging all across the city. Have you done anything outside of Austin?
We've done a couple down in Houston. We've had a number of projects that haven't yet been built. We have one currently out in Los Angeles, and we have one on a farm in Florida that's on a bit of a pause right now.
Okay.
We we find that we have some down near the coast in Texas at a resort community,
Yep.
and we enjoy that. Although we also really like to be able to go out to the job site,
Right.
and see things that are in our own area, even in our area in Austin, to really be able to be more hands-on. And I don't mean we're not builders, but to really be actively involved in overseeing in some manner the construction process, I think is an important thing for what
Yeah.
we do. And
Yeah.
it
I
doesn't
mean,
have to be local for that, but I think that we do enjoy having things that are, here in our own backyard.
yeah. If you were to have a project in Florida, I would assume that you're going to have far less connectivity to that project than you would anticipate, unless you're working with a
And
builder that's going to give you a high level of connectivity through some form of medium.
yeah, and that, I mean, obviously the technology nowadays, there are a lot of ways of communicating where you don't have to be there in person that are fairly effective. I think that there's nothing that beats being face to face in a design process. There's nothing that beats being on the job site during construction.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of ways where you can kind of really be very close to that type of communication and not be there in person.
Right. In terms of acquiring projects, I mean, you talk about now here a couple that are not local and some others that are in different communities. How are these people finding you? Or is this as a result of clients that you have that are referring you to friends, or are these people that have saw you out independently of that?
Most of our projects early on were more just kind of a 1 or 2 degree of separation kind of referral,
Yeah.
like a friend of a friend or something like that. But in the last, I'd say 10 or 15 years, the internet, or, if we're in a magazine or something, perhaps, but I think that really just having our reputation, it might be that it's not a client, but it might be that someone else has seen one of our projects, either on a tour or maybe it's a realtor, or, it's hard to kind of know exactly how you get projects. But
Right.
I had one recent project that's it's in the design phase now. And I asked the clients, like, oh, I just kind of Googled architects in Austin and you came up highly rated. Something as simple as that. And they talked to a few different people. So it wasn't as if it was just like the first person that came up. But no, I think a lot of it is, the more work you do, you've got a lot of different projects over the years. And to a large extent, they're all kind of equal in importance.
Mhm.
Something that might have been done 10 years ago, 12 years ago, if it's still there and people drive by it and see it, or they go online and they see it on the internet, they don't know whether it's 2 years old or 12 years old. It's sort of like one way I like to give a lot of analogies, but like teenagers now, or even kids in their 20s, people in their 20s, they can listen to any kind of music on Spotify. And
Yep.
so when you think about it, whether it's the Police or whether it's Guns N' Roses or whether it's the Rolling Stones or Queen or, you know, it's kind of like, I think back and it's like, well, that's kind of like if I were, that age and listening to something from the 1950s or something like, or 40s, like I would never go buy, you know,
Yeah.
some big band record or something. That would be just kind of like, kind of silly. Right. And I think, but nowadays the music is all out there. And so it's just as easy to like something that is more current or something that's already been around for a long time if they can find it, with some kind of, search or algorithm.
Yeah.
And getting back to architecture, when you do a project, you do a house, and they're all out there. Everything that you've done is out there, and unless it's been torn down or something, which so far hasn't happened, but people see those things and they don't know whether it's, oftentimes they don't know whether it's, new or old. And if it's 15 years old and still looks good, or even 20 years old and still looks good, I find that that's a real compliment because it doesn't look dated.
Right.
We don't try to, we don't purposely try to be timeless, but we, hopefully aren't too affected by some of the more mainstream trends, that will kind of make your work not look as good in 8 or 10 or 12 years.
Right.
And so getting back to like how do we get projects, I've known people who've seen something that we did quite some time ago, and they can see it online perhaps and say, oh, I really like this one house, and might be a 12-year-old project, but to them, they don't know whether it's any older or newer than anything that is more current.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that especially comes down to obviously the homeowners and their level of maintenance and how they look after
Mm-hmm.
the material selection, how it withstands
Yeah.
the environment. I mean, so that, I mean, in many ways that will lead me to what the next question is, and you talked about it, the constant interest in wanting to evolve and learn and grow. So you had a house that won some awards in the last little while, and it's your passive house. Is that right?
Yeah, no, that one, yes, and that's a good example of we always like to focus on something that we haven't done before. Like I
Hmm.
mentioned a moment or two ago, I don't want to reinvent the wheel and try, to start from zero in every project. But at the same time, every project seems to reveal something new and different about what's the essence of what we're going to be doing and learning on this project, as opposed to just applying past lessons.
Mhm.
And the passive house is when we collaborated. It was a former summer intern who was in grad school, not quite mid-career, but a little bit older as a grad student, and a tray farmer. And then when he graduated, he wanted to work for a larger practice doing a larger multifamily and so forth. So he went to work with a different company. But then he and his wife came back to us about maybe 5 years, 6 years later, and had a house, and they wanted to hire us as a design collaborative architect, which I really admire. For an architect to go to another architect takes a lot of healthy lack of ego, I guess, but it also takes a lot of confidence to say, hey, you know what? We really like what you have done in this facet of the design process,
Mhm.
and here's what's important to me. And Trey is really very deeply knowledgeable about passive house,
Yeah.
and it's been more common in the northeast of the United States and different places in Midwest and perhaps up in Canada, but a relatively new way of looking at things here in Texas. And so, but that was his real his passion and also his expertise. And so when we collaborated, we learned a lot from him, and hopefully they learned from us as well. But no, really, that was something that it was a team where we were more, and it's really simplistic to say we were the ones to kind of help guide what it looks like,
Right.
and they were the ones to do the things behind the walls that you don't see. And it was a little bit more overlap than that description, but no, we were very involved in the flow of the house in terms of shaping the spaces, the natural light, and some of the visual character of the spaces was really something that we were more actively involved with. And then he and his team were the ones that were really involved in the technical performance aspects of it. The triple glazed windows, the different building envelopes, and so forth.
Your air barrier,
And
vapor barrier, etc. Yeah.
yeah, and those are all things that really matter. And so when it comes to like some of the things that we're starting to really apply more and more, like, every house that we have done in the last X number of years meets the Austin green building standards and so forth. And Austin was kind of one of the leaders in American cities in having certain standards that are required. But you can still look at it, and not to go in the whole long thing about, when you look at how much the building industry causes, energy waste and carbon emissions and so forth. It's, people think more about cars. Like, I've driven an electric car for the last 12 years, and that's great. But when you really think about what makes a big difference, or you can recycle newspaper or plastics, and everything helps. But when you look at how big of a problem the building industry is,
Yes.
I think that's really something that is important and a younger generation of architects, I think, are really focusing more on it. And it does take a while. Change sometimes happens gradually. And so what people might have been very patting themselves on the back about 20 years ago is like just a drop in the bucket in terms of what buildings can be and how they can be, and they can produce energy or be, net zero and so forth. So there's a lot of different ways of looking at it. We're not there yet. Most architecture is not there yet, but I think that it'll be very interesting, and I'm optimistic, in 20 years and 30 years from now, like what will it be?
Right.
And I think the paradigm shift, sometimes things happen gradually and other times they kind of like have a exponential, very quick, rapid change. And, time will tell. Mass timber is something that they're also very, interested in.
Yeah.
And how can that be applicable to smaller buildings? Might not be as much, but, larger buildings and so forth. I think it's all very, again, I could go on and on about this, but I think that's, it's a big, big thing in architecture, is not so much also what it looks like, but how does it work, and how are we good stewards of the land and the environment? Is pretty important, beyond the aesthetics of a project.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting how this has all changed over the last number of years, and how much what's happening in Europe is now trickling and making its way over here to North America. We're a little slow, but we're definitely getting there, and that's what I've understood. What you've described is, Austin largely has taken on the opportunity for change within construction industry in many ways, similar to what's happened with California and Vancouver here, as you look at like Norway and Germany and Austria and all those other places overseas, and how they're looking to apply all of these really, really beneficial systems in the construction of a home. So this project, this joint venture, you won the award where at the AIA, right?
Yeah, actually, this project, it won a Preservation Austin Award. It won a local Austin AIA Design Award. It won a Texas AIA Design Award. And then this past June, we won a National American AIA Housing Design Award. And so was up in Washington, D.C. for that, which was nice to be back in my old stomping grounds. And but no, we were very proud of it. And again, it's a great opportunity to collaborate with Trey and his firm he works with Forgecraft Architecture.
It's fantastic. And to your point, like this is one of those types of projects that I think will largely lead to other opportunities as you go forward. This is a new standard of the way people are looking to build homes. And I think that over the next, 5 to 10 years, I bet you'll have more of that as a result of this opportunity, this completed opportunity. And also,
and I hope so. And whether we're involved in it or whether just more people are doing it with whoever is really what's more important.
Yeah. Oh, that's fair. Fair. Yeah. I guess, if the general collective is looking to do this, I guess that goes to your point of you talking about how you were driving an electric vehicle for the last 12 years. You're already there. You want others to get there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that a lot of what is interesting, to a certain extent successful with the LEED building programs and some of the environmental, is that you get extra points, or you get points. There's all sorts of, sometimes it's a bit bureaucratic, but you get different points if part of it is educating. Like you might see a sign for like a low water toilet or something, and it might tell you all about it, and educating the public, with signage or different ways of talking about the landscape that you have, and talking about how it's irrigated by the runoff from the roof, things like that. But again, educating the public, usually in terms of signage, but there's other ways, is also part of the program.
And
that people get influenced and inspired by and learn, from other projects, so they can do it on their own.
And are you providing any of those types of instructive courses through any of the local colleges or universities?
We are not. I think that, again, there's some public projects where signage and everything is part of it. Like if you just go to a restaurant or you go somewhere and you can kind of see, or sometimes hotels, they can actually tell you why. We stayed in one hotel, actually it was 10 years ago this week, but we were in Norway. And there's a hotel that we stayed in. It was an older building, and they're saying how like environmentally friendly it was. And one of the things was they had like a sign on the stairwell. Most American and perhaps Canadian, egress stairs, fire stairs in like a 5-story hotel or even taller. are very, very basic spaces. They're poorly lit, kind of bright, harsh lighting, and they're just concrete, metal guardrails. It's very uninspiring. And every now and then I'll use a staircase. Just if the elevator's slow, or you think, okay, well, I should get my steps in today. I should exercise. But the hotel in Norway served as a exit stair, fire and emergency exit. But it was a really beautiful staircase, had a skylight, I think, natural light. And, but they had a sign, right outside the door to that stairwell saying, this is, having a pleasant staircase that people will actively use is something that is good for wellness, the physical well-being of people, physically fit. But also, if you're not using the elevator as often, then the elevator requires energy by machine rather than your legs.
Yeah.
And so that was very interesting. It kind of made you think about, okay, it seemed a little gratuitous at first, like this is a special staircase for these reasons. But the fact that I remember 10 years later is like, if you're designing something and you're wanting people to utilize it more, then make it pleasant. Don't make it don't just do it because a building code requires it, and make it as basic and cheap as possible. It doesn't cost a lot more money to make it just a bit more pleasant.
Yeah.
And then you're trying to instigate people to do that. And for all the bigger benefits that it might have that don't seem like they're really anything to do with environment or, green building. But again, looking at it in the big, broad picture, I think is a really healthy way to think about, environmental sustainability, and not just the building materials and not just the heating and cooling, but other things that kind of relate, to the broader benefits.
Right.
Being near a train station, for example, gets you more points. Public transportation, which isn't that strong here, but again, there's looking at it. What does it mean to be sustainable? Isn't just that one building, but how the building relates to the community and to the greater urban setting or natural setting.
Mm-hmm. Right. So I guess you've had the opportunity to be able to go and talk about some of this with colleagues, or have you had an opportunity when you look at what you've achieved with that one house, have you had the opportunity to go and speak in front of a group of or a panel of people to talk about the importance of trying to build with this in mind? And when I say this,
great question. And I've given a few talks in general over the years, but I have not had one that is focused in the specifics of how to achieve these goals. I think that it's something that we try to bring to every project, to every client. Some are more receptive than others, because the reality is that some of these things do add extra cost initially.
Yes.
And not everyone has the luxury, or they don't feel like it's a good investment to build a passive house, or to, even if the energy use over time is going to pay off, it's still a matter of, and a lot of lenders, they don't really care. Like, well, it should cost this much to build a house, and if you're getting a bank loan, and there's a lot of factors and forces out there that can make some of this change a bit challenging.
Right.
Now, in terms of Austin has a very healthy, very supportive architectural community among different architects, professionals here in town. And I think we all inspire each other. And so while I have not gone and given any talks about how to achieve a passive house, and again, that's something that, go back to really giving credit to Trey and, his, passion. But there is a few different groups here in town now. Passive House has a local chapter, and there's different kind of meetups where people do discuss it, sometimes, casually over like a happy hour, and other times in a more kind of academic setting, perhaps.
Right.
But maybe you've inspired me to be more active, beyond just people that reach out to me and ask about it.
Well, I think it's such an interesting opportunity in a climate that can see some serious gains on heat, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think with climate change and everything, we're lucky this summer has not been like last summer, but last summer was brutal. And I think that more and more we don't have to convince people that whether it's going to continue to get worse or not. Time will tell, but I think that it probably will. Most signs are, showing that, it's continuing to get hotter and it's becoming more the new normal.
Yeah.
And so people are wanting to kind of make sure that they plan for that. We're not near a coast, so we're not having to design for any kind of rising sea levels or anything.
Yeah.
But no, I think in terms of just the heat and if there's wildfires and so forth, which have typically been more about say someone else's problem, New Mexico or California, obviously, but that might be something that is happening more often here in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the general population, we don't have to be that messenger to say, hey, you need to be aware of these things in the future. We have more and more clients who are already, coming to us and wanting to make sure that we address those items,
Right.
those challenges.
Yeah, I mean, look, we had in Toronto in July, there was a substantial rainfall. We had 120 millimeters of rainfall in one day over the course of about 3.5 to 4 hours. And
Wow.
and if you were one of those people that had really contemplated the idea of putting together a really strong build with really, really tight vapor barrier around, the slab to the walls and then from the walls to the roof and your whole assembly on the roof, you wouldn't have had an issue.
Right.
But
Right.
there were a lot of homes. There was over $1 billion worth of damage in this city. But if you'd factored in some of those assemblies into the overall construction over the last few years and a lot of the new homes that have gone up, you would have likely avoided some of those issues and floods.
Yeah, I think that like they used to sort of say, like sometimes they put up a stop sign or a stoplight after there's a car accident,
Yeah.
And I think that, or years ago in Florida, they changed the building codes because they had a couple of really very, very strong hurricanes,
Yeah.
and they required different codes, if you're along the coast and so forth. And the same thing here in Texas or earthquakes in California, they used to build, you can just build however you wanted, but now they require you to kind of do a certain standard that isn't going to prevent any kind of damage, obviously, but is going to help mitigate and lessen, damage to buildings and also to people's lives, more importantly.
Yeah.
And I think the same thing, how much that begins to affect any kind of sensibility. But I do feel that the general public, and not everyone is in agreement about climate change and whether how actively it's real or why it's being caused. Even people who might not agree as to why climate change is happening, I think are at least knowing, okay, well, it's here, and they would rather not pay the same utility bills, and they'd rather have a comfort in their own house and so forth. And so I think, and protected from any kind of fires and so forth. So I think that the general public is much more aware that, hey, things are changing, and to a certain extent, you might say, well, you still want to kind of mitigate climate change and try to lessen it, and by doing different best practices were emissions and so forth, right?
Yeah.
But I do think that ultimately, even if there's not an agreement about what's causing it and therefore what you should do to lessen the change, people are in agreement that things are changing. And so in the built environment, at the very least, wanting to be more sensitive and sensible, really, to how to provide a comfortable environment.
Yeah, and you talk about all of this and sensibility and the reduction of electricity and just general usage. I'm gonna deviate from now talking about your studio and talking about all of that and talk about you and the family, because I think one of the exciting things you had told me before was you've got two boys, one about to graduate from university and one that's about to start his freshman year. And I said to you, congratulations, it'll be empty nesters. And you said, no, that we actually were for the last year. And that which leads me to the discussion point about your youngest son and what he set out to do last year, which I found so interesting. Would you be able to talk?
Okay. Yeah, no, I appreciate that question. I find that I talk a lot about my two boys, both of them very, very proud of. And I think that one thing about having a small practice, at least in the way that I like to think about it, is that you can really, or any kind of small business,
Yeah.
is that you have more freedom and control over how you spend your time. Sometimes you have to work a whole lot because it's just you and your team. It's not like a big company that you can just delegate everything to. But at the same time, it really has offered me the ability to really make my own schedule, to be able to travel and to do different things. And but to answer your question about, we are empty nesters,
Yeah.
and our older son is finishing up his last year in college, and our younger son, but he and I are driving out to Los Angeles,
Yep.
leaving on Saturday, leaving in a few days, and we'll be stopping at the Grand Canyon for a couple of days and a big road trip. And but he's starting at his college, but he spent his past year here in the States. We call it a gap year.
Yep.
But he did a pilgrimage. He did a walk. Historically, it starts at the Canterbury Cathedral in England, and then it goes all the way to Jerusalem. But he started in Paris, and he walked, decided that Jerusalem wasn't really the best end destination, unfortunately, with everything happening in that part of the world. But no, he took about 5 or 6 months and walked all the way to Istanbul. And so really amazing adventure. There was times where he just, I don't know what percentage, but he had a hammock.
Yeah.
And he would stay in his hammock, or he'd stay in a monastery or a convent or in a hostel along the way.
Yeah.
And he and I joined him, my fit 19-year-old son with a backpack, and the dad who, when I describe it, I was with him in Italy for about 3 weeks of hiking, walking, and every town in Tuscany is on top of a hill. So you think, okay, well, I've gone like 10 miles, only 2 more miles left. And then you realize it's on top of that hill in the distance. And so I was able to eat lots of great food, drink good wine, and lose 15 pounds in 3 weeks. It's a really, it's an amazing experience. And it's great to spend the time with him and so forth. And then we all spent a week in Rome. The rest of the family flew over, and, I think, as every architect knows, and most people have an awareness that when it comes, there's amazing architecture all over the world, and there's stuff that everywhere has something that's interesting in how it represents its culture and its place. But Italy, of course, is one of the concentration of beauty. Every little town or every neighborhood in Rome or even little farmhouses, they're just really amazing. And what I found was it's such a deep, authentic representation of that culture and the lives of the people in Italy, and how it gets kind of manifested in their building and their towns and their urban design. And, there's some new buildings in different places that look like any suburban building, unfortunately. And not to say that new buildings have to be or better or worse than old historic buildings, but there is something about those towns that is just really, I could go on and on about that, but that was a great experience. And, as a dad, my wife and I are both very proud of both of our sons and, what they're doing. And I would guess that neither one will be an architect, but at the same time, I wouldn't be, surprised if they end up at some point being something that has some affinity towards, what I love to do and what I've been doing.
Yeah.
But
maybe they're going to go build
time
home.
will tell. They're young.
Yeah. Amazing. And your wife, you mentioned, what is it that your wife does?
She would describe it. She's had different, jobs over the past, I've known her now, actually, in October will be our 25th anniversary.
Okay.
And I've known her for a few years before that, but I've been in the professional world and a few different experiences over the years. Much more of when I talked about like having a practice and having people you hire to be a balance in a team.
Yeah.
She is very operations driven. She is very good at getting things executed, or as she likes to say, I'm the get it done person. And she's more creative than just that, and I'm more efficient than just being that creative architect. But no, I think that a really good team of how she looks at the world, how I look at the world, and we kind of overlap, but also we have our own strengths in what we bring to any endeavor. And we are currently planning a couple of different projects that we will actually be investors in some capacity in some projects that we're developing. And so that's
Amazing.
been interesting to be able to apply some of the things that we've done for other people and the lessons that we've learned, and to think, well, this could be a good side venture. Architecture is always my main focus and will be, but we also have some properties around Austin that we are looking to develop. And I think that's something that, when, like I say, when the buck stops here, then we always try to convince the client, well, this is good in the long run. This is a good investment.
Right.
But you get a great, even though I think most people like to think they're pretty empathetic, in terms of being able to look at someone else's perspective and whatnot. But when you really have to spend either your own money or you're somehow tied into it to a certain degree, then you really had to make those decisions like, oh, do we really need, like how important are all these factors? Because every project, there's value engineering, where you have to kind of every project we've ever had, whether it's a more modest project or a more, higher end luxury project, there's always a budget and there's always decisions you have to make, and you can't have everything. And that process, I think, really is a good thing. You're editing. And I think that, so circling back to, that's something that my wife and I are doing a few of these, and bring her skill set and ours and mine in that, but also I think it'll help. It's another example of how we are always wanting to learn as a practice. And I think that when you do something on your own is when you really get a really deep sense of what it must be like to be a client.
I couldn't agree more. I could not agree more. I renovated my own home, finished about a year ago, but it was, as to your point that you made, very early on in this, 2.5 years of work put into it. And when you are your own client and you have to take away all the things that you've tried to implement with others, it is different, to say the least.
It is a challenge. We renovated our own house about 5 or 6 years ago, and not a process that I really enjoyed, to be honest. And I had different friends and colleagues. Oh, that's great. You get to do whatever you want. You can do anything you want. And that's almost like the blessing and the curse. I like having that balance of a team, honestly. And I think that, but it was refreshing to try to be your own guinea pig and to try to do different things that I might not really think are appropriate to design for a client, but you get to test them out. And I think that my philosophy is any architect who does their own house shouldn't be too restrained. I think that it's an opportunity to push the limit. And even if that means that you push it a little too far, it's better than being a little too cautious or tasteful, or just, it takes more time and it takes more, a little more stress, But I think it was very interesting to be your own client on your own house renovation. And now it'll be interesting to be that as well on these other projects.
Right. Well, Hugh, I appreciate all the candor. I appreciate taking the time. I know that Mondays are generally a busy day. And so I do know that that you took time away from everything today for this. I appreciate it. I thank you for it. I thank you for the candor. I thank you for the opportunity to be able to share your story with others. And I will continue to put a Google alerts on for the continued growth and stories that come out about the practice. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Well, Jonathan, again, I've enjoyed it, and hopefully somewhat coherent and not too rambling. But no, I really appreciate some great questions, and it certainly made me think, and hopefully the same for anyone who listens to it. So again, thanks again, and I look forward to hearing more of your podcasts.
I appreciate it. Now, you know what? When I'm down, I think I'll hopefully be down in Austin next year. So I hope to I'll connect with you and link up.
Yeah, please do. Look forward to it.
Okay, take care.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.